The laundry basket slipped from Sarah's hands as the first explosion shook apartment 2B. While her neighbors screamed and scattered, something cold and familiar settled over her face. The same expression that had once made Taliban fighters retreat into Afghan mountains. Mrs. Henderson from down the hall had no idea that the quiet woman who always smiled at her morning jogs had once led classified operations behind enemy lines. But in the next 60 seconds, when armed terrorists stormed their building, Sarah Martinez would have to choose: maintain her carefully constructed civilian life or unleash the Delta Force operator she'd buried 6 years ago. Sarah Martinez had perfected the art of invisibility. 6 years of deliberately mundane mornings, coffee at 7:15, laundry by 8:30, grocery shopping with coupons clipped from Sunday papers. Her neighbors in the Riverside apartments knew her as the quiet woman in 2B who worked remotely for an insurance company, always polite but never lingering for conversations. They had no idea that beneath her floral sundress and reading glasses lived someone who had once rappelled from helicopters into enemy territory, someone whose call sign, Ghost, had become legend in classified military circles. This Tuesday started like any other. Sarah folded towels with mechanical precision, each crease perfectly aligned, a habit that annoyed her civilian friends but had once meant the difference between detection and invisibility in hostile zones. The morning news droned about traffic delays and weather patterns while she sorted whites from colors, her hands moving with the same efficiency that had once assembled tactical gear in complete darkness. Through her second-story window, she watched Mrs. Henderson walk her golden retriever, Mr. Peterson tending his tomato plants, children waiting for school buses, normal people living normal lives, Blissview, Ellie unaware that their world could change in an instant. The first explosion came at 8:47 a.m., rattling windows and sending car alarms shrieking across the parking lot. Sarah's muscle memory activated before her conscious mind processed the sound, a deep, controlled blast from the building's east entrance, not accidental but calculated. Her body had already dropped into a defensive crouch behind the washing machine when the second detonation followed, this one from the lobby directly below. The laundry basket tumbled from her hands, sending freshly folded clothes across the linoleum floor, but Sarah was no longer seeing domestic chaos. She was calculating blast patterns, entry points, tactical advantages. Screams echoed through the building's thin walls as residents panicked, but Sarah's mind had shifted into a different frequency. 3 explosions meant coordinated assault. Multiple entry points suggested a team of at least 6 operatives. The pattern indicated this wasn't random terrorism. Someone wanted control of this specific building, which meant hostages, which meant time was already running out. Her hands found the false bottom of her linen closet without conscious thought, retrieving items she'd hoped never to touch again. Tactical knife, encrypted radio, and the Glock 19 she'd carried through 17 classified missions. The hallway outside erupted with voices, some crying, others shouting instructions that would get people killed. Sarah pressed her ear to the door, filtering civilian panic from tactical sounds. Heavy boots on stairs, coordinated movement patterns, professional commands barked in accented English. These weren't amateur extremists with backpack bombs. They moved like military operators, which meant her neighbors faced something far worse than they could imagine. Through her peephole, she watched Mr. Peterson stumble past her door, blood streaming from a head wound, Mrs. Henderson supporting him while clutching her phone with shaking fingers. Sarah's reflection caught her eye in the hallway mirror, a woman transformed. Gone was the soft expression and careful posture of civilian camouflage. Her shoulders had squared into the stance that had once commanded respect from Green Berets and Navy SEALs. Her eyes had hardened into the focus that Taliban commanders had learned to fear. For 6 years, she'd convinced herself that Sarah Martinez, the insurance processor, was her true identity, that Captain Sarah Ghost Martinez was a ghost she'd successfully buried. But as armed figures appeared at the far end of her hallway, she realized some ghosts refused to stay dead. The lead terrorist wore tactical gear that Sarah recognized, Russian military surplus, modified with civilian accessories to avoid detection. His weapon swept the corridor with professional efficiency while his teammates secured doorways behind him. These men knew building clearing procedures, which meant they'd studied her home, planned this assault, possibly surveilled residents for weeks. Sarah's mind automatically cataloged their movements, identifying weaknesses, calculating angles of attack, formulating strategies that her civilian neighbors couldn't even comprehend. She had perhaps 30 seconds before they reached her door. 30 seconds to decide whether Sarah Martinez would cower in her bathroom until rescue arrived. Or whether Ghost would emerge from retirement to do what she'd been trained to do. Mrs. Henderson's terrified whimpering from across the hall made the decision for her. Some things were more important than maintaining cover, more crucial than protecting the quiet life she'd built from the ashes of her military career. Sarah Martinez had spent 6 years learning to be ordinary, but ordinary people couldn't save her neighbors from what was coming. As she checked her weapon and moved toward the door, she whispered a goodbye to the woman she'd pretended to be and welcomed back the operator she'd never really stopped being. The first terrorist never saw Sarah coming. She'd slipped from her apartment through the service corridor that connected to the building's maintenance area, a route she'd memorized during her first week of residence, because old habits die hard and tactical operators never stop planning escape routes. He was focused on apartment doors, expecting frightened civilians, not a former Delta Force captain emerging from his blind spot with 6 years of suppressed training suddenly unleashed. Her blade found the gap between his body armor plates with surgical precision, and he dropped silently to the carpeted floor. Sarah appropriated his radio and tactical vest in seconds, her movements fluid and practiced despite years away from active duty. The chatter confirmed her assessment. 6-man team. Building secured, hostages being gathered in the community room downstairs. Their leader, call sign Viper, was demanding something called Package Delta from a resident named Dr. Elizabeth Warren in 4C. Sarah's memory flashed to the quiet woman who worked late nights, often carrying briefcases that seemed unusually heavy for a university professor. Military contracts, perhaps classified research, it didn't matter now. What mattered was that innocent people were being terrorized by professionals who wouldn't hesitate to kill. Moving through the building's upper floors, Sarah became Ghost again. Each step calculated, each movement precise, every decision filtered through years of training that muscle memory had preserved perfectly. She found Dr. Warren barricaded in her bathroom, laptop clutched against her chest, tears streaming down her face. "I'm here to help," Sarah whispered, noting the woman's government-issued security badge partially visible in her shirt pocket. "What's on that computer?" Dr. Warren's eyes widened as she took in Sarah's appropriated tactical gear and professional bearing. "Weapons guidance systems," she breathed. "If they get this data, they can target any aircraft in the NATO fleet." The stakes crystallized with brutal clarity. This wasn't about ransom or political statements. It was about acquiring military intelligence that could cost thousands of lives. Sarah's civilian neighbors had become unwitting shields in an operation that stretched far beyond their quiet apartment building. Through the radio, she heard Viper growing impatient, threatening to execute hostages every 10 minutes until Dr. Warren surrendered. Mrs. Henderson's voice cracked over the transmission, pleading for her life, and something cold and determined settled in Sarah's chest. She'd failed to save teammates in Afghanistan, but she would not fail these people. Sarah's assault on the community room was surgical in its precision. Smoke grenades, improvised from cleaning supplies and fire extinguisher contents, created the chaos she needed. Years of close-quarters combat training guided her movements as she neutralized threats with methodical efficiency. The terrorists' military experience meant nothing against an operator who'd survived missions they couldn't imagine, who'd been trained by the best special operations forces in the world. One by one, they fell to combinations of tactics they'd never encountered, executed by someone they'd never expected to face in a suburban apartment building. When the smoke cleared, Sarah stood over 5 neutralized threats while the 6th, Viper himself, lay unconscious, zip-tied with extension cords from the maintenance closet. Her neighbors stared in shocked silence at the woman who'd transformed from quiet insurance processor into something they'd only seen in movies. Mrs. Henderson was the first to speak, her voice barely a whisper. "Sarah, who are you really?" The question hung in the air like smoke from the makeshift grenades, impossible to ignore or deflect. Sarah looked around at faces she'd greeted politely for 6 years, people who'd known her as someone entirely different, someone safe and predictable and utterly ordinary. The tactical vest felt familiar across her shoulders, the weight of responsibility settling back into place like an old coat. "I'm someone who forgot that we never really stopped being who we're trained to be," she said quietly, helping Mrs. Henderson to her feet. "I'm someone who learned that some masks are meant to be removed when people need protecting." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, but Sarah felt no urgency to shed her gear or resume her civilian facade. Ghost had emerged not from military necessity, but from something deeper. The understanding that heroism isn't about the uniform you wear or the title you carry, but about the choices you make when others need you most. As she guided her neighbors toward safety, Sarah realized she'd been living only half a life, suppressing the part of herself that had been forged to protect others. The quiet woman in 2B had been a comfortable lie, but the operator who'd saved them all was the truth she'd been running from. In a world where heroes often wear uniforms and carry badges, we sometimes forget that extraordinary courage can live quietly among us, hidden behind ordinary facades. Sarah Martinez had tried to bury her warrior's heart beneath civilian normalcy, but when her neighbors faced mortal danger, she discovered that some callings never truly end. They simply wait for the moment when they're needed most. True heroism isn't about the battles we fight in distant lands or the medals that recognize our service. It's about the choice to act when others cannot, to step forward when everyone else steps back, to become who we need to be, regardless of who we pretend to be. Sarah's transformation from quiet insurance processor to building savior reminds us that heroes walk among us every day, carrying skills and courage we might never recognize until crisis demands their emergence. The men and women who serve in our military carry those skills and that courage long after their uniforms are retired. They remain guardians in civilian clothes, protectors who've simply changed their duty stations from foreign battlefields to suburban neighborhoods. Their service doesn't end with discharge papers. It transforms, adapts, and waits for the moment when their community needs them most. Today, take a moment to honor not just the active military personnel defending our freedoms abroad, but also the veterans living quietly in your neighborhood, the former operators teaching your children, the retired service members stocking grocery shelves and processing insurance claims. Their greatest battles might still lie ahead, fought not for country, but for the people they've chosen to live among and protect. If Sarah's story of hidden heroism moved you, please subscribe to our channel for more stories of everyday heroes whose extraordinary pasts shape their present courage. Share this video with someone who might need reminding that heroes come in all forms, and that sometimes the most powerful among us are those who choose to serve others long after their official service has ended. Honor our heroes. Recognize their sacrifice. Remember their stories.